Why do I even mention that, since we're not normally dealing with phone calls being recorded here in the privacy context? Mention it because the plaintiff's bar has sort of cleverly, over the last few years, sought to apply wiretapping rules to the use of internet technologies. And they do this in kind of a few major areas. One initially was session replay technologies, this idea of putting an analytics tool on your website that can create heat maps or even can recreate what your website did in terms of when somebody came to the site, how did somebody interact with the site? Chatbots is another one. You had a chatbot on your website. Another is using website pixels that collect information about the person's interaction with your website, clicks, pages, views, conversions, etc., and shares that with, say, a social media company that can then use that information to sell advertisements or show you certain things, make recommendations on the social media platform. So, those are a few of the major areas where you have this. And so, what are companies to do? So what happens is you get a letter in the mail from a plaintiff's class action bar, saying we have a class action complaint drafted up against you, and we think we can win on this. You're violating the wiretapping statute or the Invasion of Privacy Act statute for that state, but we can make this go away for $25,000, or we're open to it, and they want you to make an opening offer, and then they come back and forth. And dealt with many of these. Happy to chat more offline about specifics, but in terms of how you would sort of help mitigate the risk of this happening to your company, it's being very clear in the contracts that you have that restrict the vendor's use of the data that they collected. It's again having geo-consent tools that allow for opt-outs or opt-ins depending on how your business wants to approach it. Some companies want to go to an opt-in approach for these, so that it's pretty rock solid that you were provided a notice and you consented to our use of these cookies or trackers or chatbot or pixels. And if you don't like that, you either don't opt in or don't use the site. Other companies don't want to go to an opt-in, and they want to have it be more of an opt-out. And so they give you clear notice about exactly what's going to happen, and they say something that your continued use of the site, indicates your acknowledgement and consent to our terms, consent to the terms, the acknowledgement of our privacy policy, and you agree to our use of these tracking technologies and pixels, etc. I would say that is maybe less secure than the opt-in approach, but it's better than nothing. And at least you have an argument to say, we weren't hiding the ball here. We notified people. These strategies have varying degrees of success in the courts because it really depends on the court that you're going to, the judge, the sophistication level of the judge. Are you in state court? Are you in federal court? What's the case law already for that jurisdiction, et cetera. So there are different things that go into that. Also, an area that a lot of companies I find aren't totally up on is being very mindful and careful about how you name custom events. If you are using a website pixel and it does, share information with a third-party social media platform, be careful where you put that pixel. Don't put it on pages where you have sensitive information collected, and don't name the event something that would suggest, a health condition or a financial, status or things like that are more sensitive, because then it's a lot easier for a regulator to say, well, you actually shared sensitive information through this, not just, information about how somebody used your website. Privacy policy updates to be very clear about things, and really being really on top of knowing the vendor's tools and stuff. For session replay, for instance, if you can obfuscate out social security numbers and financial information and keystrokes that they typed and health information, you're halfway to happy hour, because then at least you're taking away some of the bite of it being more sensitive information.